Well, welcome to the Sustainability and Tax Credits webinar. I'm Shereen Othman, Communications Specialist with LES, and this webinar is part of the LES Sustainability Series. Today's topic is with Marc Shkolnick, Manager of Energy Services with LES. Marc will discuss LES's residential sustainable energy program incentives and federal tax credits and briefly touch on EV and solar credits. We'll take questions at the end of the presentation. You can submit them through the chat box or use the raise hand function and we'll mute your mic. Marc, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Shereen, and thank you to customers who are joining us, as well as colleagues throughout the company. And I think I even saw a colleague out at NPPD hop on. So it is great to have you, and I really appreciate you taking time out to talk a little bit about sustainability and tax credits. I guess I want to, before I talk a little bit about some of this stuff, I want to point out that I am not a tax expert, and I don't even play one on TV. However, I did sleep at this Holiday Inn last night, so that might provide me with a little bit of expertise, but not a lot. If you talk to my staff, they would tell you that I could spend a month at a Four Seasons or a Ritz-Carlton and I still wouldn't be an expert in anything. But in all seriousness, what I hope to accomplish over the next half hour or so is to provide some clarity and some simplification over what's currently available from federal tax credits and what's also coming down the pike that is still in development, because some of this is fairly new and some of this is still in development and not available yet. And so hopefully we can kind of clarify some of that. I've done a lot of reading since the announcement of the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, trying to stay on top of things. And there's new information on some of these tax credits that are taking place even, this month. So some of it's fluid, but I want to provide some clarity and simplification. Let me just open by talking about the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed last August. The objectives of that entire bill, and it's a $500 billion spending bill with new spending and tax breaks. The objectives of the entire bill is to increase investment in clean energy technologies and energy security, also reducing healthcare costs, increasing tax revenue through tighter IRS enforcement, and imposing some additional taxes. This theoretically should also reduce the deficit, or at least pay for all the spending that is part of this particular act. Now, today, of course, we're going to talk about the energy-related objectives of the Inflation Reduction Act, of which there are several. Number one is to promote zero carbon generation and energy efficiency. Also to promote electrification, so to get more customers interested in air source heat pumps and electric vehicles and electrifying a variety of other things, because as the utility industry greens up its generation mix, by providing more electrification, we essentially are achieving carbon reduction and addressing climate change. You'll notice in some of this that a lot of the financial support is targeted to low and moderate income households, but also to serve as a catalyst for domestic manufacturing. And you'll see that that's kind of a nuance to some of the tax credits, is domestic manufacturing requirements to encourage purchase of critical supplies domestically or from free trade partners, also to stimulate workforce development and wage growth as well. So let me just cover what we're gonna review today. We're going to talk a little bit about the Residential Energy Efficiency Tax Credit 25C, which is part of the IRS tax code. That is available today. You obviously wouldn't be able to take advantage of it until you file your taxes for 2023, but January 1st is when these tax credits took effect. We'll also talk about the Residential Clean Energy Tax Credit, which is a modification basically to the tax credit on solar, geothermal, and renewable, customer-owned renewable systems like that. We're going to talk about some of the changes to the electric vehicle tax credit. And then we're going to talk about a program that is in development in many states, the high efficiency electric home rebate, which is a pretty big deal. And then I'll just mention commercial energy efficiency tax deductions that are available. So let me ask this question, and we'll have Shireen pop up a poll question for you to address. Do you know what an air source heat pump is? And Shireen, I'll have you. There you go. Do you know what an air source heat pump is? You should see that question pop up on your screen. Answer yes, no, or kind of, and then hit submit. And we'll give you just about 10 seconds here to address that, and then we'll have Shireen share the results. Do you know what an air source heat pump is? All right, Shireen, let's see what we got in terms of responses here.
Are you able to see the results? They're showing up on the sidebar for me. I don't know if they're popping up for our...
I saw it. 56% says yes. Very good. 24% of you, about maybe a little, just a touch less than half, either don't know or kind of. So that's great because we're going to talk a little bit about what heat pump technology is, and obviously folks here at the utility are probably more aware of heat pumps than the general population. So the next question I'm going to ask you is, how is your home primarily heated? Electric furnace, gas furnace, heat pump with gas or electric furnace, or I don't have a clue. Okay, 72% say gas. About 21% say heat pump with gas or electric furnace, and then 7% presumably have an air conditioner with an electric furnace. That is generally representative of the population. The single family homes, particularly in Lincoln, tend to be natural gas heated. So this is pretty representative of the general population. The reason that I wanted to talk a little bit about air source heat pumps is that is one of the technologies that the tax credits are really trying to promote and encourage adoption of. And so I appreciate you sharing your responses. We're going to talk a little bit about heat pumps here because that's the first tax credit that I want to mention. Is the residential energy efficiency tax credit for air source heat pumps. And before I talk about the tax credit, a heat pump essentially is an air conditioner that can work in reverse during the winter months. Essentially, an air conditioner transfers heat in the summer from the inside of your home to the outside. And a heat pump is able to do that in reverse in the winter months, transfer heat from outside to inside. And it's kind of counterintuitive to a lot of people that when it's cold outside, how could you transfer heat in? Well, highly efficient heat pumps are able to extract heat even in the coldest conditions down to single digits. And cold climate heat pumps may even go below that, but essentially they extract and transfer heat from outside the home to inside the home. And that therein is one of the biggest advantages of having a heat pump is it isn't creating heat like your natural gas or electric furnaces. They have to create the heat. With a heat pump, you're taking heat that's already there and you're transferring it through a loop system into your home. And so that's really the magic of heat pumps, and they've been around for several decades. The technology has improved, the efficiency has improved through variable speed equipment. So when things are on for a variable speed equipment, it isn't all on. It can vary based on conditions and preferences. And so you can conserve energy that way on top of the efficiency of the heat pump itself. So having said that, The federal tax credit currently available for a qualifying air source heat pump is 30% up to $2,000, and that's much more generous than what it was before January 1st, where I believe it was $600. So if you or someone you know will be in the market to replace your heating and cooling system, that is a very generous federal tax credit that you can take advantage of. Now, I also want to mention, where appropriate, if there's a Sustainable Energy Program incentive, and for those that aren't aware, LES has launched the Sustainable Energy Program, an energy efficiency incentive program, back in 2009. And so for qualifying equipment, we provide an incentive as well. When you work with one of our trade allies, and I'll show you how to access that list at the end, but they'll deduct that incentive. For example, $800, they would deduct that on the invoice for the system, and you'd get an instant rebate, if you will. So when you combine the two, if you're able to take full advantage of the tax credit plus $800, that's a pretty significant financial deal there. The minimum efficiency ratings for qualifying units for the federal tax credit are the same as for the SEP, so we made that simple. I know what you're seeing there may be confusing to some. SEER and EER, SEER and EER, are energy efficiency ratios for the cooling component of the heat pump. And so essentially the SEER rating is how efficient does that unit operate at different temperatures, the cooling of that system operate at different temperatures throughout the summer months. The EER is how efficient does that unit operate at around 95 degrees. That's real important to the utility because we want as much efficiency as we can to manage our peak demand on those hot summer days. And so the numbers 16 and 12 are the minimum efficiency ratings for a unit to qualify for the federal tax credit and our SEP incentive. The HSPF stands for Heating Seasonal Performance Factor, and that's how efficient the heat pump is in heating the home during the winter months. So those are the minimums. They're on our website, and they're also available on Google if you just search for these energy efficiency ratings for heat pumps that qualify for the federal tax credit. So that's something you'd want to know as well. You know, you take the same technology as an air source heat pump to cool or heat your home. You take that same technology, maybe you shrink it down and you put it on a water heater, and you can use the same thermodynamics to heat your water. You can extract heat from the ambient air around the water heater, inject it into the water, and prevent the power consuming elements from coming on. And if you put that in a place that is adequately sized, because these tend to be a little larger unit, you can see a diagram here, and that have plenty of space to operate, you can reduce your electric consumption by half with a heat pump water heater. And so similar to the tax credit for the air source heat pump, 30% up to $2,000, and LES has a $500 incentive for heat pump water heaters. There are federal tax credits that are available for high efficiency air conditioning as well as a conventional electric water heater. Those are at $600. So they're sending a clear message that, you know, you can get up to $2,000 if you go with an air source heat pump or heat pump water heater if you just exchange your air conditioner for a high efficiency air conditioner or an electric water heater. It's $600. SEP incentives for qualifying air conditioners, we also will have a $600 incentive. And again, that would be taken off the invoice when you're working with a participating sustainable energy program trade ally. And the minimum efficiency rating is a 16 for qualifying air conditioners. Sealing and insulation, always important to consider the adequate sealing and insulation of the envelope of your home. There is a federal tax credit of 30% up to $1,200. It is to my understanding that if you meet the local energy code, that is what is required. And you can find out what those R values are from a participating contractor, of which we have as part of the Sustainable Energy Program. LES will provide up to $1,000 for a combined attic and wall insulation as well. There is a federal tax credit available for windows and doors, 30% of the project cost up to $600 for windows, 30% up to $500 for doors. And I do want to mention some other considerations as it pertains to the tax credit. Number one, there is an annual tax credit limit of $3,200 when you are including an air source heat pump or heat pump water heater. Don't forget, you can get up to $2,000 for either one of those, but you couldn't do both in the same year because that would exceed the $3,200. But you could do, a heat pump water heater, and maybe you're doing windows or doors. So you can go up to $3,200 when your energy efficiency upgrade includes a air source heat pump or heat pump water heater. Otherwise, the annual tax credit limit's $1,200. And there is no lifetime tax credit limit like there was before. So each year, if you do energy efficiency upgrades, you can take full advantage of whatever the cap is, depending on what you're replacing. A word about tax credits. Tax credits only apply up to the amount of tax liability that you have. So somebody who had no tax liability could not really take advantage of a tax credit. So it's non-refundable means that the federal government isn't going to cut you a check if you owe no taxes, if you have no tax liability. So it really depends on your tax situation when you do your taxes, what your tax liability is going to be. So it's always good to, if you work with a tax preparer, it's good to consult with them. But you may know your tax liability. We're in tax season right now, and get an idea of what your tax liability might be. And then you can reduce that by dollar for dollar with a tax credit. These tax credits are available through 2032. So, you may not be in the market for a new heat pump or heat pump water heater now, but maybe in the next few years you will be. These tax credits are available through 2032. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and we'll talk about the residential clean energy tax credit, which applies to solar, also to geothermal, which is a type of heat pump system that cools and heats your home. Also applies to wind and battery storage. There is an uncapped tax credit of 30% for any of these technologies. So you could take, and before for solar, it had gone down to 26%, so now it's up to 30%. And also applies to geothermal systems. So that's a pretty good deal there. The SEP has incentives for solar, $375 per kilowatt for primarily southerly facing systems, and $475 per kilowatt for westerly facing systems. So when you combine that 30% tax credit with the capacity payments that LES provides, again, that helps defray that upfront cost pretty significantly. And then for geothermal systems, LES has incentives ranging from $550 to $1,500, depending on the efficiency rating of the geothermal system. And basically, geothermal typically works on a loop. It goes into the ground if it's a ground source system, and essentially it transfers heat from the the home into the ground during the summer months, and it removes heat from the ground and transfers it into the home during the winter months. And the earth is a pretty good store of energy, kind of a constant temperature at the depths that these well fields are dug. So it's a very, very efficient type of system. It is certainly more costly than an air source heat pump. So these tax credits and incentives tend to be a little bit more. The tax credits for this particular 25D residential clean energy tax credit, they're available through 2034. They begin declining in 2032 by 4% per year. So there's still plenty of time on these as well. Now we're going to switch to EVs, and I'd like to ask you if you currently own or lease a plug-in hybrid or all-electric vehicle. And I see that Shireen's put up the poll question. And I know there are some on here that absolutely own an EV. Let's see what the responses are here. All right. 7%. All right. So we have 9%. Okay. Well, that's higher than the general population. There, I believe last year there was about 5% of all vehicles purchased in the county were plug-in vehicles. 5% of all vehicles purchased last year. So 8% of you said yes, but obviously most folks do not currently own or lease a plug-in. How about this question? Likelihood of your next vehicle purchase being a lease or purchase of a plug-in or all-electric vehicle. You got responses that span the spectrum, those that can't wait to those that have no interest, at least for a while. And again, that's pretty representative of the market right now. There are cost considerations, there's battery range considerations, there's model availability considerations, all kinds of things that go into a decision to purchase an electric vehicle. But 20% of you said it's very likely that you'll do that, and another 24% somewhat likely. So pretty good interest right now. Well, the reason I mentioned that, of course, is there is a federal tax credit for the purchase of an electric vehicle. It is up to $7,500, and this is through 2032. However, there are some strings attached that weren't there before. If you own an EV, it's likely, not absolute, but it's likely that you were able to take advantage of a $7,500 tax credit, not rebate, tax credit, if the brand of the manufacturer of your vehicle hadn't used up its 200,000 allocated tax credits. I know that Tesla had run out of tax credits, so if you bought a Tesla after a certain date, you couldn't take advantage of it because their allocation was gone. I think Nissan might have been out of their tax credits, and perhaps Chevy as well, General Motors. But that's all gone away, and that's been replaced with this $7,500 tax credit with some caveats. Half of the tax credit, $3,750, requires at least 40% of battery critical minerals to be sourced domestically or from a free trade country. And the other half of the tax credit has to have 50% of the battery components to be sourced domestically or from a free trade country. Now, I put an asterisk by that, and that's because the federal government is finalizing the guidelines for enforcement of these requirements. And that was supposed to be completed in March. Well, tomorrow is the last day of March. It's possible that there's been an announcement in the last day or two that I'm not aware of. But if you are purchasing a electric vehicle before these final guidelines are out there, these requirements would not necessarily apply. The vehicle itself has to be assembled in North America, or I believe a free trade country. But these requirements for the battery minerals and for the battery components are eventually going to work their way in. And so it's going to make a lot of vehicles that you could apply your tax credit to the purchase of. Those will no longer be eligible unless they meet these more stringent requirements. And it's going to take a while for domestic battery and domestic mineral production or production in free trade countries to ramp up. So there may be a period of time where it'd be very difficult to find certain vehicles that comply with these requirements. I think one of the objectives here is to serve as a catalyst to get more domestic production so that we're not relying on other nations, particularly those that aren't very friendly, to be providing us with these critical minerals. Lithium, I know cobalt is currently produced in a country that is not very good to its labor, nickel, some of that. So there is some efforts to get domestic manufacturing underway. There have been some announcements made by domestic automakers that they're investing billions of dollars in getting battery manufacturing underway in Michigan and other parts of the country, but it will take time to get this ramped up. So as I mentioned, no matter those battery, mineral, and component requirements, domestic assembly is required. There is also an adjusted gross income requirement for the first time. And there's also vehicle price maximum. So depending on if you purchase a sedan slash crossover, there's a maximum amount that the vehicle purchase price can be. And there's a little higher price limit for trucks and vans. Something also new is a used car federal tax credit of up to $4,000 when the vehicle is priced at $25,000 or less. That's also subject to income limits as well. So you can kind of see, we talked early on about what's some of the objectives of the Inflation Reduction Act. It was really to provide some assistance to low to moderate income households. It's to spur domestic manufacturing, create jobs. You can see how that's working its way through these requirements for this particular tax credit. So here's a program that is pending, and I don't see this being rolled out any sooner than 2024. The High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate. So each state has been allocated funds to actually provide not a tax credit, but a point of sale rebate, where a rebate would be provided at the point of sale. It's very similar to how the Sustainable Energy Program works, where you don't have to fill out a lot of them. I don't know what the paperwork might be for the rebate program offered through this program, but through the Sustainable Energy Program, there's very little paperwork that a customer has to complete. They get that rebate on the invoice when they pay it. It's just a reduction on what they owe. That's the model that is being used here for this particular home rebate program that will be developed or set up by each state's energy office. So the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy will be the agency that would administer the home or the high efficiency electric home rebate program when it's launched. But I don't anticipate that this will be launched until sometime in 2024 at the earliest. And I believe the contractors will claim the rebates and pass along the credit. So it should be a fairly easy process for customers to access this. So these rebates will apply to air source heat pumps, to heat pump water heaters when it's replacing a non-electric water heater. There's that electrification effort. It'll even apply to electric panel upgrades, to rewiring, to weatherization. And what I've put there is in the second column for households that are at or below 80% of the area median income, and I have that listed there at the bottom of that slide. So for households that are 80% or less of the area median income, they would get 100% coverage up to those maximum amounts. So you could get up to $8,000 rebate on an air source heat pump if you qualify at 80% of AMI. 1,750 for a heat pump water heater, again, if you qualify at 80% of AMI. Then there is a 50% rebate up to the maximum levels for those in the 81 to 150% of area median income, and I put that number also at the bottom of the slide. So there's that effort to provide financial support for low to moderate income households to become more electrified in their homes. There is a program maximum of $14,000, very generous. So when this program launches, we'll certainly have a lot more promotion and more guidance when the program is launched in 2024 or thereafter. And the last thing I'm just going to mention is there is a little bit more complex tax treatment for commercial. There is a tax deduction, 179D, for energy, for modeled energy bill savings, reducing energy bills by 25 to 50% paid on a square foot basis for projects that result in those kinds of savings. But the work that's being done, the workers must meet prevailing wage requirements and apprenticeship standards. And if it doesn't, then there is a much smaller tax deduction available on a per square foot basis. The interesting thing with this is that tax exempt entities, nonprofits, can actually allocate those tax deductions to designers, engineers, and contractors, and effectively take advantage of the deduction. And those renew every 3 years. There are a variety of resources available, and the one that I definitely want to call out is Rewiring America. If you go on your mobile phone and you go to rewiringamerica.org, you'll come to a site like this. And if you click on the hamburger menu button, there is an IRA savings calculator that you can click, and it'll ask you to put in your zip code, your homeowner status, your household income, how you file taxes, single, married, head of household, household size, just a few questions. You push the calculate button, and it'll tell you all of the incentives and tax credits that you would qualify for. It's really slick. So that's rewiringamerica.org. And these other sites are great resources as well. Energy Star, the Congressional Research Service, McKinsey & Company, and then of course our own SEP. www.les.com/SEP will get you all the information about the Sustainable Energy Program. I do want to talk about the SEP as we wrap up here. Essentially, a great place to start is going to the website, les.com/SEP. You can click on this number 2. It'll take you to the search to find participating contractors that will provide that pre-authorization that's required before you actually begin your replacement. And then they will put the incentive on your final invoice. We have information there about the various programs and the dollar amounts, the minimum efficiency levels, that type of thing. And then that's kind of a snapshot of that search engine of the participating contractors that are in the SEP. And then you can contact one or more of them to get bids and decide which one you want to go with. But all of them have been trained, have been oriented in how the SEP works. And that, in 34 minutes, is federal tax credits and sustainability. I'd be delighted to attempt to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for outlining all the great resources for customers to reach out. If you do have questions, you can use the chat box or you can use the raise hand function, and we'll unmute your mic so you can ask. But we did have a 2-part question come in through the chat box. We have a customer asking, how do we know what providers work with LES to provide the incentive?
Yep.
And how do we find a provider for steeling and installation?
Yep. So if you go to les.com/SEP, you'll find the information about the program there, including that link to that list of, it's actually kind of a search engine. So you would select, if you're interested in heating and cooling, air conditioning, heat pumps, you can select that and click search, and it will come up with all the different trade allies that are participating in the program. And that's probably the easiest way to find that information. Any other
We'll give it
questions out
another
there?
minute for any lingering questions. We don't have any right now in the chat box. But we did record this webinar, and we'll add it to the les.com Sustainability Series webpage over the next couple of weeks. So if you missed parts of it or you want to share it out, you're more than welcome to go back and watch parts of the recording. Mark, do you know why there are limits on EV incentives based on cost of the car?
Yeah, I think that one of the objectives of the Inflation Reduction Act was to really gear a lot of the financial benefit to low and moderate income households. There's been some criticism that those taking advantage of the federal tax credits tend to be in the higher income, and that bears that out. The average household income of somebody who I think purchases a Tesla Model S is in the $150,000 to $200,000 household range, and the average income for a plug-in all-electric owner is above $100,000. So I think there was a concerted effort to direct these this recent round of tax credits to low to moderate income households that may, quite frankly, struggle to purchase even maybe a used EV. So I think that's kind of the philosophy behind why those income limits were put in place.
How old does a heat pump need to be to merit replacement? My furnace, 95% and heat pump were updated in 2008.
Yeah, so 2008, that would be 15 years, right? That's getting at the point where you reach life cycle. I think that a contractor coming out and taking a look at it, just routine maintenance, if they do a maintenance on it and they say, well, looks like your compressor or some other major expensive part is starting to fail, that would probably be the time. There are units that are well maintained that go beyond 15 years. There are some that have gone on beyond 20 and 25 years. So it really does vary. It varies on how often that unit's running, how it's sized, all different factors. If you're in a neighborhood that has lots of trees and it gets get a lot of gunk on the outside unit, that can be stressful, make the motor or the system run harder. So it really varies. But at 15 years, that's a good life cycle for a unit. It's probably worth at least having a maintenance done if you haven't already, and just see if without telling them that you're asking if the unit's good to go. You might just have them come out, do a maintenance. They'll leave a report behind, and they would indicate if they see something that might be starting to fail. And sometimes it's just the system fails, and then you're in a position where you need to make a fairly quick decision if it's a hot day, right? So ideally, you're able to proactively make that switch and do so with some times. You can look at different bids and decide what you want to go with. But those are some of the considerations that I'd recommend when determining when it's time to go to a new unit.
So it sounds like if the unit's less than 5 years old, it's probably better to wait it out a few more years.
Oh yeah, 5 years. Yeah, was it 2016 or was it
2008? But
Oh,
there was
2008.
another.
Yeah. If you've got a 5-10 year old unit, it should be in good shape. I honestly, I don't know what the warranty lengths are on a lot of this, but obviously it's within warranty. It's in great shape, but if the system's well maintained, I would expect 15 years is a pretty good bet for that system to run at minimum.
Great. Are the IRA credits available for purchases made in 2022, or do they not become available until 2023?
Good question. The only tax credits that are retroactive to purchases made in 2022 is the solar, the geothermal, and battery and wind. So if you happen to, and that would have I think that would have had to been in Q4 because the change took effect immediately, and that would have been in mid-August. So I think if you would have put in solar in the last quarter of 2022, it's very likely you would have qualified for a 30% tax credit rather than a 26. But everything else that I talked about, energy efficiency wise, that's January 1st. That took effect January 1st of this year. So the purchases had to have occurred during this calendar year.
And so will the rebates, which go effect in 2024, will those be usable for 2023 purchases?
No, no. And those will apply as point of sale rebates on or after the date that the program is launched. And again, we don't know for sure when that'll be. I say the earliest would be Q1 of 2024 because there's some administrative work that'll have to occur at the state level to get that up and running.
Are there any tax credits for induction stoves? I replaced my gas stove November 2022 with an induction stove, and I love it.
Mm-hmm. No, however, it will, I believe there is, that's part of that rebate program that will be available uh, in 2024 or thereafter. I believe that induction stoves are, there's a rebate on those. But if you've already gone ahead and made the purchase, then there wouldn't be a rebate available. But they are really very efficient and very clean systems. So it's good to hear that you're having a good experience with that.
All right, we'll give one more minute for any additional questions. I don't see any new ones as of now, so we'll just give it another minute. Otherwise, we can wrap it up.
And yeah, in the future, when the rebate program is finalized, we'll come back and revisit that because the amount of dollars that are going to be made available and the fact that it is a rebate, which is a lot easier to access than even a tax credit, that'll have a profound impact on the potential of folks um, that would be able to take advantage and leverage that. The state of Nebraska has to make a formal request for those funds, so that has to happen as well. And then we would get those dollars allocated. There's still a lot of unanswered questions about how, what if those funds are, if they're all exhausted, is that it? Does the rebate program close down? How much dollars will be available? There's still a lot of unanswered questions that we'll want to clarify once we're alerted to how that'll all be organized.
Are there any credits or rebates for replacing a panel now?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Are there currently any credits or rebates for replacing a panel? Like an electrical panel, I imagine.
Oh, so for upgrading, that would be part of that rebate program. There are no, but there may be, it's possible under the federal tax credit program that there may be a few $100s available for panel upgrades as a federal tax credit. The tax credits I highlighted were primarily those appliances and things. So that is a possibility. I don't think it would be as generous as the rebate, but if you are looking at needing to upgrade a panel because you're electrifying your home for energy efficiency, need more amperage to support some of this equipment, it's possible that there are a few $100s available for a panel upgrade.
What questions should you ask a potential contractor if you're looking at getting better installation to help select a provider?
Okay, so repeat that question.
What questions should a customer ask a potential contractor if they're looking at getting better installation as far as selecting a provider?
Now, if you're talking about insulation or installation?
Installation, sorry.
Well, I would make sure that they understand how to properly size the air conditioner or heat pump, if you're getting one of those. You don't want your unit oversized so it consumes more energy than it needs to. It should be sized to the home, and there's a lot of variables that go into that. How well your home is insulated, the windows, the direction the windows are facing, all of those kinds of things determine what the capacity of your heat pump to heat and cool your home should be. So I would certainly maybe even ask if they've performed a manual J or know how to perform a manual J, which is really the process that one uses to size properly air conditioning and heat pump equipment and furnaces, that type of thing, and kind of get an idea of the experience they've had, and even if they'll provide a reference or two if you have time. Obviously, if you're sitting in a hot house, you may not be able to do some of the due diligence you'd like. And so if you are proactively making those switch outs, that gives you that extra time to do some of that type of thing. For insulation, you obviously want to go up to the current energy code standards, and the insulation contractor should know what those standards are, the R values. And sometimes the structure of your home may limit your ability to go beyond what it, up to or beyond code of today, especially if you have a very old home. You might even have wiring, like knob and tube wiring, that may prevent you from insulating the attic until that knob and tube wiring is removed and some of your home is rewired to allow for that. So there are some intricacies when you're insulating your home. We always think, something like insulation, that obviously is a lot different than sitting in a home with a broken air conditioner. There, I would suggest getting at least a couple of bids, visits from contractors to take a look and see what they recommend, and then kind of compare. You'll get a sense as to what their experience is in terms of if you visit with them, that type of thing.
All right, we've got 3 more questions and then we'll close out the webinar. The first one is, are residential rate service levels counterproductive to encouraging the electric homes?
Well, so the point is that our facilities charge goes up. There's 3 levels. So depending on your annual energy consumption, you may be on a level 2 or a level 3. Is it a deterrent? Well, the fixed cost to serve that home go up to serve a home that consumes more electricity. But when you compare it to other options, it still is probably going to be very cost competitive. It just depends on the situation. So the rationale behind the facility charges is to essentially charge what the utility has to have in terms of distribution and transmission to bring reliable power to the home 24/7. And obviously a home that's consuming a small amount of energy doesn't have quite the same fixed costs, has less fixed cost required to provide that than a home that's consuming a considerable amount of electrical energy. But if you put in the SEP incentives, that reduces that upfront cost as well. So that kind of mitigates some of that.
What if the NDEE drags its feet on setting up the rebate program?
Well, I don't have an idea at this point that that's what they're doing or that they will be doing. Obviously, they're a public agency, so they're subject to citizen input. And if there's a concern about the pace at which things are going, I encourage people to make contact with either their state representative or contacting the agency to see where they're at. But I wouldn't presume that they're dragging their feet. I know that they're working on some funds that were made available through the the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that was passed even farther back last year. And so I would imagine they're going to begin to focus in on this home energy rebate program in the very near future.
Great. Well, those are all the questions we have, Mark. Thank you so much for all of your insight.